Great, I think we can go ahead and get started. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening from wherever you're joining us from. Welcome back on behalf of the Boost community and the World Health Organization to the sixth session of the COVID-19 Recovery for Immunization Programs Fellowship, which will cover publishing your results, scientific writing, and developing case studies. So before we get started, I want to go over some logistics for today's session. First, if you'd like to listen to the session in French, please select the interpretation button in the meeting controls at the bottom of your screen. Again, this is a globe icon. We've included some step-by-step instructions on the screen, which will also circulate through the chat on how to access interpretation either through your computer or your mobile device. Next slide. So during the session, you can engage in dialogue with your peers and session facilitators through the chat box. We ask that you also use this forum to ask any questions throughout the session. We'll be compiling those to ask at the end during a Q&A section of the session. And then once we get to that Q&A section, you may also raise your hand to feature or to voice over your question, and that is if time permits. And then finally, last but not least, we ask that you rename yourself. So your first name, family name, and country, so that we can record your attendance for today's session. Next slide. I just wanted to remind everyone that the recordings and the presentations from each session will be uploaded to the Boost Learning Group in both English and French languages as soon as they become available. So hopefully within a few days after the session, so by the end of the week. We also provide registered course participants with these materials via email, and we'll post the resource links in the fellowship Telegram group. Of course, if you have any other questions or concerns, you can email us at info@boostcommunity.org. Next slide. So today I'm joined by our session facilitators, Samir Soda, who's the Medical Officer of Program Strengthening, and Laura McLaughlin, who's the Technical Officer for Life Course and Integration, both of whom are a part of the Essential Program on Immunization at the World Health Organization. Next slide. So we have here on today's agenda just a reminder that your strategic proposal or case study is going to be due on July 1st. We have circulated the case study and strategic proposal template, both in English and French. So we do ask that you use that template in order to draft your submission. And again, we'll have some instructions on how to submit that submission in the next couple weeks. But again, that deadline is July 1st. So during today's session, we'll first go over some key takeaways from the last session, and then we'll dive, of course, into today's main topic, which is scientific writing and developing case studies. Again, at the end of the session, we'll save some time for Q&A with the audience, so I do encourage you to share your questions throughout the presentation. Next slide. So thanks again for all those who posted on the Learning Group forum last week. Last week's question was, what part of the session will be most relevant to your work ahead? And what will you do differently now to better understand and address low uptake? And as a reminder, last week's session was on vaccine hesitancy and demand. So on the next slide, we showcased some of your responses. Several of you mentioned behavioral and social drivers as a key framework, which can help you with your work. And that's outlined here by some of the responses that we have. And I'm not sure if maybe Laura or Alex wanted to share some of the French responses as well. And we can also, as I mentioned, we'll share a link to the forum where you can view all those responses, and feel free, you can go back and answer some of the previous reflection questions as well. Next slide. So I think with that, I'm going to hand it over to Laura, who's going to go over some of those key takeaways from last week's session. Over to you, Laura.
Thanks, Liz, and hello, everybody. So last week we had a really great presentation from Lisa Menning, who talked about vaccine hesitancy and demand. So in the next slide, I think that one of the important aspects of the talk was the amount of information and resources that are available to help us understand how to increase confidence and demand. And Lisa covered what drives vaccine uptake, reasons why measuring behavioral and social drivers are really important in these days, how we can move from gathering those data into action, ensuring that we have quality immunization services, because this is a reason that that can lead to increasing vaccination uptake sustainably in our countries, and also how to talk about misinformation and kind of infodemics. So I think there are a number of key publications that have just been recently released, and I hope that you've been able to access. They should be available in both English and French. So there's a link on this page, but also, you know, from last week, you also can listen back to the recording if there are any interesting aspects that you wanted to follow up on. But I think this was a really great opportunity for you all to kind of see what aspects related to behavioral drivers can actually lead to increasing immunization uptake.
I think you go to the next slide. Hi, everyone. So I'm Samir Soda. I'll be beginning this talk today, and I'll be sharing the space with Laura as well, who'll be doing the second half of the talk. So next slide, please. So before we begin, it's important to establish why we are having this presentation today. So in the chat, can you share with us why we should be publishing our results and the work we do? Just go ahead and put it in the chat, some ideas as to why you think it's important for us to write and publish our results. And I see someone says it can help with ideas, so everyone can learn from that and everyone can influence public health action. This is all correct. Yeah, so for information, decision, and action, share experiences. So I think we're all kind of thinking along the same lines. Next slide, share a couple of thoughts from my end as well. So the first bullet is agreeing with what you're all saying too. It's to improve the broad practice of public health by allowing others to learn from your experiences. So that includes the positive and the negative experiences. We sometimes think we need to publish all the things that, all of our positive experiences, but there's also a lot of learning from the things that don't go so well also, and we should try to publish those as well. The second bullet point is just a lesson I learned from a mentor of mine many years ago. And the point was that if you don't publish your results, it never happened. And what that means is that if we don't actually take the time to document what has been done, there's no record of it happening, and there's no opportunity from others to learn from that experience. So it's as if it never happened at all, which is a shame for all of you who've done all the work to meet those accomplishments, and to never document it means there can be greater learning from it as well. And then the third point is it's often challenging to take the time to write and to publish the things that we do. And sometimes we take the help of external partners to help us with that, which is fine if you have the opportunity. But the objective here is to improve your capacity and ability to write as well. And if you did the work, why shouldn't it be you who writes about it yourself? You're the best person qualified to talk about it. So our objective here today is to build a little bit more of your confidence and comfort level to start doing some of the writing for yourself. Next slide, please. But the first thing we need to do is get a sense of what our baseline status is here. So the question we have here for you is, have you written and published a scientific paper before? So it could be a journal, an international journal, it could be a journal in your own country, in your own local setting. So I just want to get a sense of what everyone's background is here before we continue with the rest of the presentation. Right now we have 100 people who have responded. So we have about 50% of participation right now who have filled out the survey. And it's pretty been consistent from the very beginning, but I'm going to give it another minute or so to get us up to a higher percentage here, 60% participation rate so far. Have you ever published a paper before? And we can go ahead and end the poll now. And as you can see here, it's pretty much what I anticipated would be, which is that it'd be a mix across the board. And roughly half of you have and half of you have not. And so that's what I was anticipating. And the reality is, even if you have published before, we can always improve our skills. And we're hoping we can make a little bit of a step, incremental step for you as well to help improve your writing. And for those who have not, you're really our target audience here today to kind of help you overcome some of the barriers to writing that you might be experiencing. So next slide, please. Now in the chat, I want to know, for those of you who have not written, and even those who have written before, what are some of the barriers that prevent you from writing? What stops you from writing? If you can put into the chat some of the reasons you find it difficult to write scientific papers. Because I think you'll find that we all have similar challenges. One is the busy schedule of work, statistical analyses. One person wrote lack of skills, time. I think we all struggle with time. That's going to come up, I'm sure, frequently. Yeah, I think there's busy with work keeps coming up and time again. I saw one about concern about the critiquing of it, and confidence came up again. And I think all of these things you're pointing out, they're all common reasons that we find it difficult to write. Frequently, I'm seeing lack of skills here. So let's go on to the next slide, and I'll show you some of the reasons that we know of that I think all of us struggle with. And there's a list much longer than this, but some of the common reasons for people find it difficult to write. One is difficult language. So most journals tend to be in English. There are journals in other languages, including French, but it's not often the first language for everyone. Whether it be writing for an English journal or a French journal, you may have another language that's your first language, and it's difficult to write in that language. Everyone I think, has struggles with time, and that's one of the common reasons. Not knowing how to start is a common reason, particularly for those who have never done it before. Another reason, not knowing the format to use. Lack of confidence was pointed out by many of you. And then also not understanding your results and outcomes, and trying to interpret what you have worked on and how to translate that into a paper is another common reason as well. So we're not going to be able to address all of these challenges, but I think most of these we'll be able to address today in this presentation. Next slide, please. And so my last poll question before we get to the meat of the talk: is writing a talent or a skill? And when I say talent, I mean a natural ability that you're born with. And when I say skill, it's a learned ability. And we're getting pretty frequent participation on this. About 40% of you have responded so far. And I see people are putting their opinions there in the chat as well. And the vast majority of you, we can go ahead and end the poll now, are saying that it's a skill that we learn, and it's not a talent. Now, in reality, writing is a little bit of a talent and a skill. Next slide. But it also depends on what we mean by writing. So there's different kinds of writing, right? So there's fiction writing, which tends to be abstract, creative, and not always true. And for the purposes of that writing, that's for entertainment, and we read it for pleasure. Now, for fiction writing, more talent is required because of the creativity, especially for something like poetry, right? That requires a certain level of talent to a certain degree, as well as skill. But scientific writing is completely different. It's about being very concrete, always true, and based on facts, right? And the purpose behind it is not for entertainment. It's because the reader wants to be informed and wants to learn. And you read, honestly, we read because we have to. It's part of our work. It's part of what we do every day. It's not just for entertainment and pleasure. And here, it's much more about skill, because it takes skill to be fairly structured and to be concrete. And so this is really an important lesson here. There is a mix of talent and skill involved, but when it comes to scientific writing, it's much, much more about skill. And skills are more like, if the example I like to give, it's like learning to drive a car, or it's like cooking, right? Those things, no matter how many lectures you listen to, or no matter how many books you read, you're not going to be good at it the first time you do it, and you only get better at it the more you do it. So although we're trying to help you get over some of the hump today and overcome some of these barriers to writing, at the end of the day, the only way you're going to get better at writing is just to do it often and do it more and more. And then it will gradually get better with time, just like learning how to drive or learning how to cook. Scientific writing is a skill. Next slide, please. So what are the goals when we're reporting science? Well, again, it's about communicating a message. And so because the objective is communication, we need to be very clear and not ambiguous. We need to be very precise and accurate. There should be no vagueness whatsoever in interpretation. We need to be concise, use as minimal words as possible, not be verbose, not be wordy, right? And so when you think about like the example I gave earlier about fictional writing, those people who write novels, they're going to be very descriptive and have lots of descriptive language, lots of adjectives. That's not necessary in scientific writing. In fact, it's discouraged. You need to use as few words as possible in scientific writing. And we need to be objective. We need to be impartial. There should be no subjectivity here. You're almost like a reporter. You're just presenting the science. You're presenting the facts. You're leaving the interpretation to the reader. There is room for interpretation in the discussion section, but for the most part, the writing is going to be about objective reporting. Next slide, please. So it's important to remember that manuscript writing is not easy, requires lots of work. There's going to be drafting of that initially happens, and then it's going to be revisions again and again. You submit it to a journal, and then it's going to come back again, needing to be revised based on the feedback that you get. And then you have to check the proofs before it finally gets published. It can be a long process, and there's no immediate gratification. So, those who are the best writers, they go through multiple revisions, and those revisions often are because of feedback they're getting from their peers, from their colleagues. And in fact, that's why we call it peer-reviewed journals, because it's other colleagues in the field who are reviewing it for the journal and giving you constructive criticism. So you have to be willing to take the criticism to make the writing better. And so it's good that we all go through it. It's good to know that in advance that you will have constructive criticism. It's not intended to hurt your feelings. It's intended to make your writing better. Next slide, please. So a couple of things to remember before you write. One, just a general principle, always think before you write. I think for many of us, probably because of our educational systems, where we often take exams, and in those exams, you have this time limit where you have to answer a question and write as much as you can as quickly as possible. When we start doing scientific writing, most of us tend to do the same thing again. We just sit down and just start writing right away. But in reality, it's in your benefit to take some time and think, what do you want to communicate before you start writing? If you don't do it, you actually end up regretting it because your paper might go in a completely wrong direction than what you originally intended. Next slide. And so we often talk about the elevator speech, and I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with this term, but when we talk about an elevator speech, we're talking about if you were to step into an elevator and want to communicate to someone on that elevator about your work, you only have the duration of that elevator ride to communicate it, which is what, 1 or 2 minutes. So you have to be able to describe it all in 1 to 2 minutes. And in doing so, you're going to obviously focus on only the most important things and not get lost in the details. And that's what you need to think about before you start writing. You need to think about what's the elevator speech of your project, of your intervention, toward COVID recovery. And can you describe it in 1 to 2 minutes for somebody so that they can understand it well? You should have it thought out beforehand. And in fact, you should probably write it down and keep it with you as you start to write your paper. So let's go through some of the steps of writing a paper. Next slide, please. There are 5 steps I'm going to go over with you here before we go over the structure of a paper. So the first step is pre-writing. So here it's just make notes, scribble ideas. It's just to get your brain working and thinking. You can ignore neatness. Don't worry about spelling or sentence structure. This is all about just getting your ideas down. And it's about that elevator speech part that I had talked to you about earlier. Is thinking through what is the most important points of this paper that I want to be able to communicate. You think about who your target audience is and what's the purpose of your paper. The second step is doing the actual writing. And it's important to know you don't have to write in sequential order. You can start with whatever section is easiest. And we're going to talk about structure a little bit later. And then you can skip around to different sections based on when you have the information available to write that section. And just keep writing and writing. You're never going to have this paper written down in one draft. It's going to take multiple drafts. So the first draft should be just a lot of just being comfortable to write and not getting stalled with overthinking and writer's block. Next slide, please. The third step is when you start thinking about revising the initial draft, right? And when you revise, you need to think about it in a particular order. Focus on the content first. Always think about that first. Then once you're content with the content, then you can focus on the structure and the style. Always keep focused on your main purpose. And it goes back to the elevator speech I mentioned earlier. That should be ideally written down, sitting next to you as you write your paper. And if you always keep that in mind, your paper won't steer off topic. So you can always anchor the paper around that main message that you're trying to communicate And that allows you to have the reasoning there in your paper and allow you to make that message very clear. Don't be afraid to get feedback. In fact, it's encouraged to get feedback from your peers, your mentors, your supervisors. The more feedback you get, the better your paper will become. And then you be ready to circle back to all the pre-writing you did earlier on, all those notes you jotted down, refer back to it to help remind you of the thoughts that you had thought of early on. Next slide. And then finally, the fourth and fifth steps is editing and proofreading. That's when you get to the final stages. That's when you check if the accuracy of your data, check for grammar mistakes, typos, and things along those lines. And that's really the refinement stage. So these are all the steps that you would go through the writing process. Next slide, please. But what we need to talk about is when you write, you need to think about the structure of the paper. So scientific reports share a common organizational setup, and that's by design. We want a common structure, right? And can you think of reasons why you would want to do it? I have the answers there for you, but I want to make sure you're all following me here. So put in the chat why we need to have a common structure, right? Why would you think it's important? And again, the answers are there for you, but I want to make sure no one's falling asleep while I'm talking. So can you please put in the chat why you think it's important to have a common structure to a paper? Like, meaning, why do scientific papers always follow the same structure? So for better or faster understanding, for uniformity. And it goes back to the point that I was saying earlier, right? Fictional writing is for entertainment. And possibly when you're doing entertainment writing, you want to surprise the reader, right? But in scientific writing, this is about delivering information in a very concise, direct, and easy way. So if we all have the same structure, then it makes it easier to read, and it helps the readers move through the article fairly easily and quickly. Think of it almost like you have a map and they want to go straight to that destination in your paper. That's what you're trying to do, is have the set structure so they know how to get to that section. It's common for scientists to not read the entire reports. They'll just focus on the structure of interest. And so you need to have that set structure to make it easy for them. Next slide, please. So here are the common elements to scientific paper. First is the title, then the abstract, and I'll be going over those in a little bit more detail. And then Laura's going to go over the next components in more detail, which is what we call the Imrad structure, which stands for introduction, methods, results, and discussion. We end our papers with references, and sometimes we may have appendices as well. Next slide. So when it comes to the title, it should be informative and specific and no jargon. And we have a lot of jargon, meaning terminology that is common to our profession that may not be common to the other people outside of our profession, but our audience might be wider. So we need to be very careful about what type of words we use. It applies to abbreviations as well. Like in immunization, we frequently talk about DTP, but if you put DTP in your title, you're going to alienate a lot of potential readers because they don't know what that stands for. So you would want to spell out the entire vaccine. Your title should have specifics about what you did, when you did it, and where you did it. It needs to be concise. It needs to be understandable. So I'm going to give you an example here. We're going to go back to the chat. Okay, I already told you here that's too vague, right? As a sample title, COVID-19 recovery in country X. Can you tell me in the chat why this is too vague and what you would do differently? Give me your thoughts in terms of what you think is not right about this title. And you can look at the slide in the first bullet. Yeah, there you go. So place not mentioned, times not mentioned, it's not specific. So this is something that we have to be very thoughtful of when we make our titles. And think about it, when this gets published, if the purpose is to make sure people can access the information, you also want to make it easier for them to find it and, for indexes to be able to identify it. So if you have very vague information here, it's going to be harder to find the paper. So next slide, I'm going to give you a sample of how this could be better. This is just an example. Maybe the title can be a little bit more specific, engaging the private sector to facilitate catch-up vaccination in District Y, Country X 2022. So we've put a little bit more of what was done, right? Engaging the private sector to help with catch-up vaccination. We gave a little bit more detail here on the where, because it's possible that you did something that was for the entire country, but I know many of you are also at subnational level. And if that's the case, you should specify what subnational level you're at. And it's also the when, right? When did this happen? This wouldn't be an interesting paper if it was 50 years ago. It's interesting if it's recent though. And the title should already have that information so we know. Now, some people would say, well, why do I have to put that? Because, the publication date kind of tells us when it happened. In reality, it doesn't always tell you that because sometimes it takes time to write a paper. And so we may publish in 2022 about work we did in 2019. So it's always good to put in the title the actual time period you did the work. All right. And, I actually was thinking about this title earlier today, and I was thinking this could even be potentially better because this title says engaging the private sector. So we know what you did, but we also don't know if it was a good outcome or bad outcome. So we could even rename this engaging the private sector to improve coverage to facilitate catch-up vaccination. So it's good. The more informative it is, it helps the reader know if this is a paper worth reading or not. Next slide, please. So the next component that I'm going to go over is the abstract. So abstracts are important because it's a quick way to understand your project and your work without requiring the reader to read the whole report. And sometimes readers use this to decide whether they're going to read the whole report or not. And sometimes they use it just to get the information they need because it should ideally be informative enough to get a good sense of the whole report. Now, the abstract is generally short. It could be less than 250 words. Commonly, I see less than 300 words, but it's a very short summary of the report. And it follows a pretty similar structure to the paper. It begins with a basic justification for the project, your objectives, the basic methods used. It's not going to go to the extensive detail you'll have in your actual report, but just the most important methods that were used and specific results, meaning not all of your results, but the most important results will be in the abstract. And then the major conclusions. The difficult thing is that because it's so short and journals are very strict about the word count limits, you have to be very clear and very precise in your wording, very concise. And that only happens with revisions. The most common mistake I've seen with people writing abstracts is they think they need to write a good abstract on the first draft, and they constrain themselves to the word count limit on the first draft. My advice is do not do that, accept the fact that you're going to need multiple revisions. And on the first draft, focus on getting all of the important content into it. So the word count limit might be 250 words, but your first draft might be 500 or 600 words because you were just worried about getting the most important content into that first draft. Once all of the content is in that first draft, your subsequent drafts will work on revising it and making it more concise. And after repeated revisions, you can get the word count down. It's not easy, and you will possibly need help, and you should reach out to others to help you with it. But the worst thing you can do on the abstract is leave out important findings, important conclusions, because you are too concerned about the word count. So focus on content first, then worried about the word count after. Next slide, please. So I'm going to give a brief intro to the Imrad structure, and then I'm going to hand it over to Laura. As I mentioned, we tend to have a standardized structure in scientific writing, and the most common structure we use is the Imrad structure. And so the letters of Imrad stand for the components of the structure: introduction, methods, results, and discussion. In the introduction, this is about why did you start this project, or what is the core problem that you're trying to address? And it should also include your objectives of your project as well. The methods are about what did you do? The results are what did you find? And the discussion, which is perhaps the most difficult part to write in the paper, and Laura is going to talk about that, is what does it all mean? That's where all the thinking and interpretation really occurs. And why do we use the Imrad structure? Well, that's the standard structure we tend to use. And like I said earlier, it makes it easier for the reader to rapidly find what they want. So sometimes somebody just wants to look straight at methods. How did you do it? Because I want to do something similar. They know where to find the methods because that's the structure you used. Next slide. Laura, I hand it over to you now.
Thanks, Amir. So everybody, this is another poll question for you. So we want to know, what do you think is the first part of a paper you should write? So in the chat, in the poll, just click on what part of a paper you think you should write first. And we can see that we only have 20% of you so far. So we'll give you another couple of seconds. So this is a little bit of a quiz, because I suppose Samir actually mentioned earlier what way we should start to write a paper. So once we get to 60, 70%, I think we can stop the poll, MJ. So, okay, we can end the poll here, and I want to show that 60% of you participated, and over 77% of you said that the introduction should be written first. 15% of you said the methods, and 5% of you said the results, and only 1% said the discussion or the conclusion. And I think we can stop sharing the results now. I think there is no really first part of a paper that you should write. A lot of us would like to write the introduction first, because sometimes that's the most straightforward or sometimes the easiest part of a paper to write. But I think it really depends on which section fits best. And sometimes we get advised that it's better to do your results section first, then do your discussion, then do your methods, and then write your introduction at the end. So, but I suppose it really depends on how comfortable people are with taking that approach. But typically that is writing your results is the most advantageous approach to take to writing a scientific paper, because it kind of structures then what goes into your discussion and then what goes into your introduction. So on the next slide, we're going to go through, I suppose, the scientific method that's used to write a paper. So we think about what is a problem, what is already known about it, why is it important, and what question do we want to answer. And MJ, if you could just advance there, there's some animation. Those 4 questions kind of help us identify, here's the problem. So you have to really be clear about explaining to the reader, what the problem is, what is known about it, why it's important, and what answer or what question do we want to answer. Following on from that, we think about how will we look at the problem, and this answers the question how we studied it. And then finally, we think about what do we find. So this is the findings, the results, and then the next part is what does it mean. So these questions you have to ask yourself when you're writing, because then the reader itself will want to know the answers. So by thinking through this type of structure, it can help you really write a very clear and articulate paper. So in the next slide, these questions actually correspond to the Imrad structure. So by addressing those first 4 questions, you're introducing why you've written this paper. When you talk about how you did it, that's the methods, how you did the work. What did you find? Those are the results. And what does it mean? The discussion, that's where you bring all your results together and compare maybe with other findings, and then that helps kind of solidify what you found. So in the next slide, we talk about the introduction. As many of you think, this is a section that is the first one to go for, but it can help to have an idea in mind of what you want to do, and hopefully with what we talk about today, in the future you'll have a good structure in mind when you start to write an introduction. So what is the problem? Usually what we do is we briefly describe kind of why we've done this work, and it provides context for the problem. So kind of gives them a global perspective of maybe a current or of a situation, and then we try and make it relevant by explaining the significance of the problem. And then it usually ends with objectives of the project. So usually what we do is we reference key topics or key papers that are relevant to the topic. So we need to make sure that we have done some literature searches before we start the introduction, read some papers relevant to that topic area, and then you can incorporate that into the introduction. Also, it's an opportunity to define some terms. So for example, if you want to talk about even something simple like diphtheria, tetanus, pertussis, oftentimes we call that DTP, but you need to spell everything out in full. Any acronyms for maybe your organization or for anything that's particular to your country, it's good to define these terms, because not every reader will know those, and also define abbreviations. So you want to try and make your introduction clear, interesting, and also set the stage so that the reader can understand, this is the introduction. I think I know what I should anticipate for the rest of this paper. So in the next slide, this is showing a funnel style, where you just try and, I suppose, it's trying to describe to you how you should approach writing your introduction. So at the beginning, you think broad. What is a problem? Why is it important? So usually we start with like a global context. So we could use COVID-19 recovery as an example. So broadly speaking, we can say the COVID-19 pandemic has led to significant disruption to immunization programs globally. Usually immunization coverage pre-COVID, we saw 86% of our populations were covered with 3 doses of diphtheria, tetanus, and pertussis, but we've seen a decline. Why is that important? It's important because we know that children are more susceptible to vaccine preventable disease, and there is likely increased risk of outbreaks as a result of this disruption. What is known? So what is known, we can talk about our own country context. So you can say that in country X, typically immunization coverage is around a certain percentage, and improvements have been made in improving coverage. However, as a result of the pandemic, we saw backsliding, and this is why we're in this current situation. Then we can go on to the last part, which is the objective. So in order to address the drop in coverage in country X, we worked together with the Ministry of Health and other immunization partners to implement activities to address the disruption and increase immunization coverage, or whatever specific example you want to provide. So this kind of gives you a broad overview of kind of that funnel approach, where you start big, you focus on the country, and then you focus on the objective. And also you can also bring in kind of other relevant papers, maybe from neighboring countries, say that, you know, this disruption was also affected this country, and you know, just to make it kind of interesting and set the context and the scene clearly for the reader. Next slide. So some common mistakes that are made is that people really go into a lot of detail. So we said we try to keep this short to 1 page if possible, or 1.5 pages, 2 to 3 paragraphs. So don't have it too long, don't give too much details, don't be too general and vague. So, you know, if you only talk at the global level and then go to the objectives directly, you know, there's no country context provided in the introduction about your own country. So that's yeah, I think that should be kept out. And then also it contains discussion material. So this maybe is a tricky one to interpret, but sometimes when we write our discussion, we then would use you know, this comparison example, or where other countries had done similar activities that you had done. That could be something that could be mentioned in the discussion, but sometimes it's in the introduction. And in general, I think with a lot of writing, a common mistake is that sometimes information is in the wrong section. So that's why having somebody else review it, and having it of course be submitted to a journal, then you'll have external reviewers who can be quite critical and want further explanation, and will tell you where some discussion, where some material needs to be and where it shouldn't be. Next slide. So the methods is a very, very, very important section, because I think not only does it explain how you conduct the project, but it means that if somebody really likes the approach that you took, it means that they can replicate it in their own country context. So it should be essentially like a recipe. You know, you did X, Y, and Z, and it should be clearly described. So sometimes it may depend on the type of journal. They may request specific subsections. So may relate to the population, data collection, the type of analysis that was done. And as I said, it should be written so you can allow others to duplicate this in the future if they want to. It also should describe how you plan to measure outcomes and success. So that's very important. And it should be very concise. And I think there's no need for unnecessary details. That's not a part that's important at all. The most important thing is to keep it very complete, concise, and ensure that if somebody else comes along and has not understood, has not seen this type of work being done before, that if they read their methods, they could do that themselves. And that's the most important thing that you need to consider when you're writing a methods section. Next slide. So there's some key points you need to keep in mind. So who was part of this study that you did? Where did it happen? What happened? how was it done in terms of data collection, data analysis, and also ethical approval. So these are kind of some details that are really good and important to keep within your method section or to keep in mind when writing your method section. And when it comes to ethical approval, I want to go on to the next page. This is a requirement that many journals are asking for more and more. So any research or any work that's done that involves humans, human participants or human tissues requires ethical approval. Now, this can often vary depending on the country, but proposals, for example, for some of the work that you are all doing, so the proposals that you're going to submit on July 1st, if there are plans for you to involve maybe an assessment type or some type of data collection as part of your activities to increase immunization coverage, your proposal should be reviewed by either an institutional review board, if that's in your country, or by the Ministry of Health. However, depending on the country, if activities that are being described are deemed to be part of program activities, they're often exempt from ethical approval. But I have to say that is very much country dependent. And we have experience where we see some countries recognize that these activities would fall under the remit of general immunization strengthening. So there's no need to go through any procedures for approval in terms of for ethical clearance. But in other countries, they're more strict, and they have these, I suppose, institutional review boards that are well established, and they require reviewing proposals in order to ensure that they meet ethical requirements. So that's something to keep in mind for implementing activities in your country, that if ethical approval is needed, that should be try to obtain that in advance. Next slide. So the results, this is the section where we find out what we did. What did we find out? So often this is the most important part of the paper. Typically, many researchers may just jump straight to the results and discussion section, and they'll skip over the introduction and the methods if they're familiar with this area of work. So it's a very, very, very important section. It's a section that does require a lot of work, and it requires a lot of refining and reviewing to ensure that all the information is accurately reported. This is a section that you don't interpret major findings, only the facts. So you don't say that 70% of children missed out on their third dose of diphtheria, tetanus, and pertussis, and this is a huge decrease compared to what the estimates were in 2019. No, the fact is that 70% of children missed out on their third dose of DTP. Stop right there. Also, when you're saying 70%, many journals will require that you provide the numerator and the denominator, as well as the proportion. So be prepared to have all those information available. And it should be, make sure that all your findings are concise, clear, and accurate, and presented in a logical sequence. So you want it to be kind of to flow. So you start with typically high level, like these are the number of participants, or this is the population, the proportion of the population. If there's any demographic information, you kind of provide that at the beginning, and then you kind of work your way down to kind of more detailed findings that follow a logical sequence, often replicating how the method section was detailed. So this is a very easy way to kind of structure your results. Flow is very important because you want the reader to know kind of where they can find things, and also to be interested in the findings. So you try to also present any data in the text that corresponds to tables or figures that are provided, and that allows people to either get more clarity on understanding it, but also sometimes we provide figures that are kind of, or sometimes we provide information in text that often can be better illustrated in a figure or in a table. So it really depends on what type of information you're trying to share. And we want to try and ensure that we link whatever we write with the figures and tables. So sometimes you might see in some papers that there may be a table, but it's not linked to the findings. So you're wondering, what is this about? So that's showing that there was some disconnect between the writing and what was presented in the tables and figures. So it's very important to try and make sure that this is a very clear and concise section. And this is a section that takes, I think, the most amount of work. Next slide. So figures and tables, like I said, these are important aspects because it can allow you to share more information than writing it in the text. Often the text, we only highlight kind of some of the key findings that are from figures and tables. We don't mention everything that's in a table or figure because otherwise papers would be very, very long. But the tables and figures should be labeled and referenced in the text, like I said. So if I say that 7% of children missed out on third dose of diphtheria, tetanus, pertussis, beside that I would put in table 1, and then within table 1 I should have that exact corresponding figure within that. The titles of the tables and figures should be self-explanatory. And what we mean by that is that they should be able to stand alone from the article itself. So it kind of goes back to the title example that Samir was sharing earlier, whereby if I just said COVID-19 recovery in country, demographic information, that doesn't really give you a lot of context or understanding about what's within that table. So if you were to say demographic information related to COVID-19 recovery in certain districts, country X in 2019, labeling and keeping all that information succinct and also informative helps keep that figure and table independent, so that if someone just wanted to look at the figure, they would know exactly what paper that corresponds to. Also, it's very important that you have the tables and figures are done in a way in which they are clear and visible, and particular when it comes to figures, oftentimes they can be kind of small, or some of the text can be small. So we need to ensure that that whatever you're trying to provide is clear. And also when it comes to tables, some journals will require that either decimal points are a certain either become before a certain number of decimal points. So you need to be clear what the journal requirements are. And often you'll find that it's good to have 2 sets of results within one graph. So it's sometimes it can be more interesting or to have these comparisons in one figure than having them spread across multiples. So this is kind of an idea of some of the key things that are important for figures and tables. And the next slide, we're just going to focus on tables themselves. So like I said, they should be simple and self-explanatory. Informative titles, like I said, they should be independent of the article itself, so people know where the text comes from and they know the context. They shouldn't just be a repetition of text. So, you can't put everything from a table into the text and vice versa. So I think make sure that the tables are, to have the most key important information. And as Samir mentioned, we also have an appendices section for many papers, whereby if there's some findings that you think are somewhat relevant, but you don't go into a huge amount of detail in the results, you can put them in the appendix. So yeah, and some other styles that certain journals will request for tables. So it really very much depends on the journal, but sometimes they will request their double space, there's no vertical lines, or they can be quite once you actually get to the stage where you're finished with the paper and you've submitted it, the next stage is the review by the journal, and sometimes they can have very interesting feedback for you to try and make sure your tables and figures are a certain way. And the next slide, we're going to discuss figures. So again, same thing, make sure they're self-explanatory, informative titles. Ensure that the text is large enough to read any detail that's mentioned within the figures, and they have to have a very clear and detailed legend. Often in many figures, we have, for example, maps, but there's maybe certain indicators or symbols within that. It needs to be clear what those relate to, otherwise it's not going to be very relevant or easy to understand. And then also we need to ensure that not all the information, that we do include some information that is not included in the text. So, if you just show a figure, which is one thing, and you mention the text, then there's no need to have the figure. But if there's other information in that figure, then it's good to include it. And depending on what type of figure you have, sometimes you may have a graph, and you need to ensure that the axes labels are well indicated and clear. And because sometimes you may see some axes within a graph and you're like, I don't know what that is. Is it relating to the proportion? Is that a number? The units are not clear. So you need to ensure that you have very detailed and clear axes. Next slide. So the discussion. This is as noted here, the most difficult section to write, and it really can be. So sometimes a good way to approach this, as I said, is to start with your results, and then once you go to your results, sometimes it's good to just, I find that it's good to, when you're writing your results section, if there are key results, you just have them as a bullet point in your discussion, and then you can kind of build out your structure then for your discussion as you go on. So the structure typically would be summary, so very high level, saying in this study, which looked at the COVID-19 recovery in country X, we found that by implementing certain interventions, this led to whatever proportion increase or no increase in immunization coverage. And you can then begin and interpret and compare some findings with other countries or with other studies. So this is your opportunity to do some interpretation and comparison between your findings and others. Other interpretations is also good, where you can try and help understand what results you got compared to what others had, or maybe other reasons why things may have gone well or not have gone well. Limitations of a study it's an important section, because that also helps with replication of this for reproducibility of this study for others. So if someone reads your methods and thinks, this study looks fantastic, and they're going to go straight ahead. But then if they read the limitations of the study, then they may realize, okay, there were certain aspects of the study design that maybe could be improved so that they can make further improvements themselves when they go to try and reproduce that. It's always very good also to mention as kind of a closing way in your discussion is to discuss next steps or any new questions that arose as a result of your study. So I think typically in many studies, they say that there's a lack of evidence in this area, so it requires further research. But also new questions could be brought up. You know, if you, for example, carried out this study and then found that maybe a reason why coverage didn't increase was because of maybe behavioral and social drivers that you hadn't addressed. So maybe that could be new questions for you to address going forward. And also it's very helpful, I think, for other readers to kind of read what next steps and new questions could also be relevant for them. I think also, you know, there's also an opportunity for you to say whether or not the study that you did is generalizable for other country contexts. So I think, you know, this can also help motivate other researchers who say like, oh, you know, this work was done in a certain country, but they think that it could be reproduced in another country. This is something that maybe I might consider. So in the next slide, I think we're going to go through some of the common mistakes that are mentioned that are kind of clear in discussion. And I think a lot of times that's why I said the limitation section is really important, because sometimes people only emphasize positives, but you know, we don't do everything perfect all the time. So it's also important to emphasize the weaknesses. Repeating some results, sometimes, yes, you can mention some results as long as you make sure that you have some form of comparison or can look at that and interpret it in a certain way. Otherwise, you're just repeating exactly what you said in your results section. Also, sometimes people introduce data that were not mentioned in the results. So sometimes that can happen, and you read some papers, or when you're reviewing papers, you see that this is actually, you know, something that is not good, because the reader's like, I haven't heard this before, but now it's being mentioned in the discussion. Also, sometimes people can inflate the importance of findings, like this is the best study that's ever been done in countries, whatever. So I think it's good not to overinflate the importance of your findings. I think it's good to be grounded and keep it concise. I think that's the main thing, keep it clear and concise. Another thing, as mentioned here, no mention of limitations, so that's problematic. And then drawing conclusions on evidence that does not support. So, you know, if you draw a conclusion saying that, you know, children were missing out on vaccines because of a certain reason, but there's nothing to support that within your results, then it's very, very hard to draw that conclusion, and it'll really detract the reader's attention or even confidence in the results that you've presented, because clearly, yeah, you haven't presented those findings in that correct way. So those are kind of some of the common mistakes, and I think it's really good to kind of think through as you're writing your paper. And I know that from experience, a discussion can often be the section that, yeah, you leave to the very, very last, because it can change often. But I think it's also the one that requires the most amount of concentration and focus, and also review of other more recent studies or other things related to the area of work that you're writing about. And I think it's an area that warrants a lot of attention, because it kind of really helps solidify what the importance is of the study, that you did. So in the next slide, this is why sometimes we give this tip about working backwards. So you write your discussion based on your results. You write your results based on your methods. Your methods are based on the objective in your introduction, and the objective is based on the problem stated in the introduction. So these linkages ensure that there's a flow, a consistency, and also it helps you kind of build out and structure your paper as you go along. So like I said, when you're writing your results, start by putting in some bullet points in your discussion, and then you can work backwards then to try and really build out a structure of a paper that's concise. And I think also, as you read other papers as part of your introduction and discussion to kind of help strengthen those sections, you can also get a lot of inspiration about how people phrase things or how people describe certain aspects of the work that they've done. And I think that'll really help towards making sure that you have a very clear and concise message brought across in your paper, and that people can really enjoy. So in the next slide, I think overall, we know that writing is challenging, but it is important to communicate findings. And I think Samir mentioned at the beginning that, you know, if you do the work, it's important that you write it. And I think that many of you have probably experienced so many things that other people can learn from. But the thing is, only way we can, or sometimes we do communicate this, is through anecdotes. Oh, I heard in country X that this happened, or I heard in country Y that this happened. But what can we do with just a story, you know, if it's not written down, or where we can't learn and look at what were some of the limitations and what were some of the opportunities and challenges? This is why scientific writing is really important. And it's important that you take the time to sit down and document some of the things that you have experienced or some of the work that you've done. As Samir mentioned, scientific writing is a skill, not a born talent. Anyone can do it. It's like following a recipe. You just have to practice, practice, practice. You have to be open for criticism also. You have to take on feedback. And often when we submit papers, typically 3 to 5 reviewers will look at your paper and they provide feedback. Some of these people may be experts in the area, some of them may not. So it requires a level of patience to take on that feedback. Sometimes it can be very difficult to take feedback from some reviewers because some of their questions are just so random. You're just like, this is no relevance even to my paper. But you have to be very patient and reply and respond to all the feedback. So, you know, but ensuring that you follow the standardized structure and that you ensure linkages in your writing, I think you can all make a really good attempt at drafting papers, submitting them to journals, and hopefully other people can learn from your experiences. So in the next slide, you know, a lot of you had said that you know, you don't write because you can't find time. But how do you make time to write a paper? How do you think you could make time and set aside time to write a scientific paper for yourself? So in the chat, why don't you just pop some suggestions that you think would help you with setting aside time and actually writing a paper. So some people have said having dedicated time of the day, think in the day and write at night, collaborate. That's an excellent point that someone has made. Collaborate and write with other colleagues. Absolutely. I think that's a key point. Reading others' notes, try and do it within working hours in a pattern. Someone wrote to just link with universities or collaborate. So I think that's actually in the next slide, we've just put in some ideas. So try to block off precious time in your schedule. In my calendar, I try and block off time. Often that doesn't happen because I get called into other meetings. But if you can try and block off precious time, do that. Some people are very, very good at this. They cannot be disturbed for a certain part of the morning on a certain day of the week. because they are reviewing papers. So I think that if you can do that, that's something that would be really good. Keep your outline nearby. So have an outline so you kind of always have an idea of what you want to try and achieve. Create a schedule for writing time. So that's, so you can block off time, but as part of your schedule, say, okay, today I'm going to finish my results, or today I'm going to start in the discussion, or today I'm going to try and, maybe map out some of my methods. And then as part of that, you can set a word count. So you can have a certain word count. So, okay, I have the morning blocked off. I'm going to try and write 400 words or try and write 800 to see what you can do. But I think by giving yourself little targets, it really, really helps you to try and make sure you stick to what you want to do. I think it's also very important that you reward yourself for finding time for writing, because I think we're all busy. It's not easy to find the time. It's not easy to write either. But I think if you can reward yourself, say like, okay, if I finish this, then I'll be able to do something nice, or I'll go and have a nice lunch, or I'll make sure that, I give myself some free time at a certain point, or take a nice break and have a nice coffee, or say I'll meet with a colleague. So these are just some ideas. And I think also the points that were made in the chat, some very good points, is to include colleagues, collaborate with others. Sometimes it can make things easier. Sometimes it can make things more challenging. But I think being collaborative is always, the incentive is always good. And I think it'll also, it can make your paper much richer if you work with other people, because we all don't think the same, which is fantastic, because if we all thought the same, that would be terrible. But I think working with others, somebody will be like, oh, but did you remember this? Or did you try and include this? It can really, really help with writing a really good paper and having a good experience. And it can take time. Sometimes once you submit your paper, you may be waiting 6 months to hear back from reviewers. And sometimes you may not hear back for 6-7 months. And then they say, we're not accepting, your paper is not eligible for acceptance in this journal. So you have to submit to another one. So really, it's all about patience. I really think that paper writing is all about patience and dedication. And, but at the end of the day, I think it's important that you can document what happened at a certain point in time based on your experience. And I think that's the important part of this. So I think that's next slide. We have opportunity for some Q&A. So thank you all for your attention. And let's see if there's any good questions that we can address.
Thank you so much, Laura. From the chat, we can see that people found this session extremely useful, and they're feeling happy that they didn't skip this session. So we have a few questions. I'll start off with a question that was not really covered in the presentation. A good question from Maja Romanowska from Poland. The question is, where do you think it is the best space to publish as a beginner, since most of the reputable portals require recommendations and previous writing done?
Samir, do you want to address that? I haven't seen that for some reputable journals.
I haven't seen journals requiring previous publications. What they may ask for, and they commonly ask for, is suggestions from you on who can review the paper as part of the peer review process. And then that gives you the option to name people that you think are experts in the field that should be consulted, but they don't necessarily follow those recommendations. They're not obligated to. And if you don't know anybody, it's okay. And it just makes life easier for them and helps expedite the review of your paper if you have names in mind that they can use. But I don't recall there being, I haven't seen a journal where they've required documentation of previous experience to be able to submit.
No, and typically sometimes, when, as we mentioned, the collaboration aspect is very important. And many times people who are beginners will publish a paper with a more senior person within their team, because they may be a supervisor or somebody who has experience with that particular subject area. So that sometimes can be advantageous because they can provide input. But also, we're going to get controversial here, Samir. Sometimes more senior people may not participate or contribute a lot to the paper, but will be co-authors. So, but that's a discussion for another day. We'll keep that aside. But just to say that if you're a beginner, I think collaborating and working with others is the best way. And also, having that as a recommendation for submitting a paper, I don't think that's a nice prerequisite to have. So you should try and find a journal that is more open to accepting publications from beginners, because this is how we all start.
And make sure, because papers you're going to be writing are related to the work you're doing, your organization, especially if you're working with government, needs to clear and be aware that you intend to submit and publish this paper. That's important for all of you to do that.
Yeah, so the person who asked the question has said that ResearchGate, for example, won't even register you without a recommendation.
ResearchGate is separate. That's like a portal where you upload your publications. But I mean, that's not great, because if you want to follow people that are publishing in an area that you like, then that's not great. But I suppose this is a platform where people publish and share their publications. So it's when you have a publication, typically you upload it to ResearchGate. You sometimes make it publicly available if it's not an open source journal. So that's kind of a slightly different thing than a journal for submission.
Yeah, so there were some discussion in the chat around costs for publication. Seems to be very high, especially for beginners. Do you have any comments on that? How do we get funding to publish a paper, or have cost of publication waived?
So many journals do provide waivers for if you come from a low-income country or low-middle-income country. So what I would encourage you to do is to explore that option, and many of them make it publicly available, that information. Many of them don't make that publicly available, but they'll still honor it. So I've had experience where colleagues have requested that waiver to a journal who doesn't mention anything about that option on their website, but they still reach out to the journal requesting, can you waive it, provide a waiver for this fee because I come from this low-income country, etc. And they often will do that. So I would encourage you to pursue that option.
Yeah, absolutely. I fully agree with Samir. And I think I want to also emphasize very clearly that there are some journals that request extortionate fees for publication, and these are often not reputable journals, but they accept your paper very quickly, and then it doesn't go through a thorough review process, but then they may request sometimes fees of $5,000-$6,000 for accepting a paper. So please stay clear of these journals, and make sure that you, if you do publish, that you try and publish in a journal that is open access. Open access journals means that no matter where you are in the world, you can open a paper that is of interest to you and read it. But sometimes these journals that charge very, very high prices for papers, those people, you often have to pay to read a paper, sometimes $30 to $50, $70. So make sure that if you are going to publish, you find a journal that accepts open source. And as Samir said, many of these journals, they do have waivers. If you say, I'm working at this level within the country and I'm from country X, and is there a possibility for waivers? That's always a possibility.
Great, thank you so much. So next series of questions relates to tables and figures, the section that you covered quite well. There are a series of questions from Mohammed Tanveer Ahmed from India, asking about what is the maximum limit for tables and figures? Is it mandatory that articles should include figures? Another question was similar, if it's a qualitative research, are tables and figures relevant for that kind of publication?
There's no minimum requirement. So if it's not relevant to your paper, you're certainly not required to do tables and figures. Remember, always keep in mind that the main objective is communication. So if it helps convey your findings and your message more clearly, to have a table and a figure, by all means, you should use it, but do not force it just because you need to have a table and figure. So always keep the communication as your primary objective. In terms of the maximum amount, it's determined by the journal. So there's some variability to the number based on the journal you submit to. As just a general rule of thumb, roughly 3 to 4 are usually the maximum. I wouldn't go beyond that. If you within that range, you're usually okay.
Yeah, and I think for qualitative papers, sometimes it can be helpful to have a figure describing the area that you were doing the study in, or a table could be helpful to demonstrate some of your findings. But I don't think that, as Samir said, there isn't a minimum requirement as long as you justify why you don't have them in there. And in terms of the maximum number of tables, as I mentioned, sometimes if there's information that is somewhat interesting, but you don't want to include all of it in the results, you can just mention in your results section that further details can be found in Appendix 1. So you can add additional tables or figures that may not be super relevant to your study, but you still, you did the work, you want to show you did the work, you can include them in the appendix section. And typically that is a separate section from the journal. And if somebody's really interested in your study, they will go there and read your appendix. I don't know how often that happens, but just to say that is an option, that you can always put additional information in the appendix section if there is a limitation on the maximum number.
Great, thank you so much for those responses. The next question is asking about what if the paper is a prospective work to present. This is from Asta Mongolo from Cameroon.
So some journals accept protocols. So if you want to do a prospective piece of work, you can actually publish a study protocol. So that is an option that is available, and there are a number of journals who accept proposed protocols. And it's a good way to at least begin the foundation of your work. So you've written a clear protocol, you publish it, and then you carry out the work, and then you can publish the findings in that. So definitely prospective work is accepted in some journals, but it has to be done in quite a structured, I suppose, protocol format, which luckily follows the Imrad structure. So it means then when it goes on, when you go on to do your actual implementation of the work and describe those findings, then you can actually follow a lot of the structure that you wrote for your protocol.
Samir, do you have anything else to add?
No, but the only thing I would add is that if this prospective work is happening over a long period of time, like perhaps like a long cohort study occurring over years and years, you can also publish like intermittent reports of what's the data for the first year, what's the data for the second or third year. You can do it that way in little pieces as well.
Great. I mean, I was thinking if the question also related to the project that the proposal that we want to get participants to write. So there are 2 tracks. So I don't know if we want to clarify that and so where this kind of
if it's related to our tracks, so track A is when you're planning this protocol of something prospectively to happen, right? That you want to plan an intervention, and the way the template has been laid out for the proposal, if you look at it carefully, it follows roughly the Imrad structure to help you prepare to potentially write this down the road. The only thing you won't have at this point in time is the results and the discussion, but the introduction and the methods will be there, and so you're starting to get ready to write that paper when the results come in. And I would encourage you to wait for those results then in that case. For those who are doing track B who've already done interventions and they're looking to do the case study, we're suggesting the case study be written in the Imrad structure. Not all case studies, I might add, have to be written in Imrad structure. You may notice that sometimes they're written in different structures, but that's because of different audiences. So you might find, our colleagues in communications often work on case studies for advocacy purposes, for donors, et cetera. It's a different style of writing there. But because our objective here is to share the learnings for our technical colleagues, the Imrad structure is the accepted structure that everybody's used to looking at. That's the structure we will ask you to do moving forward for this as well. And so if you've done an intervention and you're doing that track B, you can start writing out the framework for that paper now, because you should have all the results in theory and start thinking about the discussion as well.
Okay, thanks for that clarification. So we see that there is a hand raised from Vijay Bade. Vijay, would you be able to unmute yourself and ask the question directly? I mean, I would also
Good
ask.
evening. Good
Yeah,
evening.
please, go ahead.
Good evening. I am Dr. Vijay Bade from India. Can we present related to pregnant ladies status in COVID-19 epidemic? As we have gynec and pediatric setup, we have a lot of data. Over.
Is your question in regards to the projects for the fellowship?
Yeah, yeah.
I
Project
mean,
to fellowship.
so I think we can take your question offline because it probably requires some follow-up questions from our end. But I think, we're fairly flexible on the topics, provided that it's related to immunization recovery. So if it's immunization related, we'd be fairly open-minded toward accepting it, because that is the primary objective of the fellowship.
But sir, we have taken history of pregnant ladies. Is she taken first dose of the vaccine or second dose of vaccine or booster dose?
So let's touch base offline and we can help answer your question, because obviously we're going to need to go back and forth to clarify the details of what you have there.
Okay, I will.
Great. So we have two more hands raised. So now next I will ask Mohammed Amer from Egypt to please unmute and ask the question directly.
Good afternoon. My question is about randomized controlled trials in private organizations. We don't have ethical committee in the private organization in Egypt. So how can I get approval for my project or my randomized controlled trial from ethical committee? Where can I go for this approval? Thank you.
Okay, so there was the voice was not so clear. So if the speaker, Samir, you understood the question well, please could you please first repeat the question and then provide a response?
And I saw the question that he wrote in the chat earlier, so I understood what he was saying. So if I understood correctly, his question is, he works for a private health organization where they don't have an ethical committee there. And so for his project moving forward, how can he get ethical clearance? And so it's hard to give you an answer that will be perfectly applicable in your setting there in Egypt. But, I can just tell you from previous experiences in other settings, what I've observed is that often what organizations do is that's when they will collaborate or reach out to local academic institutions to see if their ethical committee can review their proposal as well. And so if that option is available to you, I would suggest that you look for a local academic institution with an ethics committee and see if they're willing to collaborate with you to at least review your proposal. Laura, I don't know if you had any other suggestions as well.
Yeah, I suppose as you mentioned, this is the collaboration aspect with more senior individuals. So if there are more senior individuals within your organization, showing them the proposal and sharing and discussing it with them, you can also get better understanding of what is possible and what isn't. We have to ensure that any work that is done in collaboration, particularly, even if you're working for a private organization, if this work will impact a community that's also related to or under the remit of the Ministry of Health, then it's important that you also collaborate with them.
And the other potential collaboration that I forgot to mention is that it varies by government, by country, but sometimes the governments themselves will have ethical committees as well. And so if it's a project that you might be able to collaborate with your government locally, that's another option to pursue as well.
Great. So we have two more hands that are raised. And at this point, I would also encourage our Francophone colleagues, please don't hesitate to ask your questions or raise your hand. We do have interpretation available, and one of our speakers also speaks in French. So please don't be restricted by the language issue. I would next ask Mohammed Asif to please unmute and ask the question.
Thank you so much, and it is really very thrilling for the beginners to write about the paper. I just want to know either that there is any software will be used for the interpretation of the data and getting the results. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Laura, Samir,
So is this asking if there's a shortcut to getting from the results and interpreting the results? I think that's what was being asked. And I think the only way that things happen quicker is with more experience. So the first time you write a paper and you're interpreting your results, it's going to take time. But as you become a more seasoned writer, it'll become much more straightforward, and also you will know easily what needs to be done, what interpretation, what comparisons can be made. There are some checklists or cheat sheets that kind of help you think through what needs to be done. And we'd be happy to share an example with you that we've seen in the past, so we can add that to the resources for that we will share. But I think in general, you have to use up here, you have to use your mind, and also by reading other papers, you really get to understand how people interpret things and how you can compare to some of the things that you do. So I think that's the best way to show. But there's no fast way to doing these things. It does take experience and it takes trial and error. So you'll get there eventually, but like I said, perseverance and patience.
Now, I concur with everything Laura said, and it reminded me when Laura was talking about the discussion section of an experience I had when I was in medical school. I had a pharmacology professor who was sharing his experience with a paper he had written decades earlier on research he had done, and he had some peculiar findings that were unexpected in his research. And in his discussion, he spent some time trying to think through how to interpret it. And he proposed different hypotheses as to why these findings were that way. And he wrote one sentence in there that said that maybe nitric oxide acts as a vasodilator, meaning it helps open up the blood vessels. And it was just a theory, a hypothesis based on the findings of his research, but he wasn't sure if that was the mechanism it worked. He got the Nobel Prize in Medicine, and he attributed that whole Nobel Prize in Medicine for that one sentence that he wrote in the discussion, which was a thoughtful sentence of thinking of how to interpret his results. If he had not taken the time to really think through how to understand his results, he would have not won the Nobel Prize. Literally, that one sentence won it for him. And it highlights to me how important it is when we think through our work to take the time to really think and understand the bigger picture of what's going on here and what are the implications. And that's what the discussion is for. And that really only comes from you and your own thinking.
Great, thanks. So we have a few hands raised and many good questions in the chat also, but with time, maybe we would not have time to give everybody the floor, but rest assured, we will answer your questions and have them available to you. So maybe we'll have time for one more question. And at this point, I wanted to ask Manal, if you could please unmute and ask your question. Manal?
Hello, okay. Do you see me? I want to ask about the proposal. If I understand well, I must finish the proposal by 1 of July, and then revised by you. And then if you accept my proposal, then I will go through to the scientific paper. The second question: if I wrote a thesis or dissertation, can I find revision from you or just for scientific paper? Okay, I want to ask again during the proposal writing, can I find help from you or not? Thank you.
So during the proposal writing, Manal, this is your strategic proposal. This is your using your country context and understanding what needs to be done. So this is to be done by you. Then you can submit your strategic proposal, and it will be reviewed by subject matter experts and the mentors who are people with many years experience in immunization, and they will provide feedback on that proposal. So that's kind of the structure and the way we have this this fellowship set in place. And if people write proposals with very comprehensive argument as to why COVID-19 recovery needs to happen, if it comprehensively addresses how to address COVID-19 recovery, then you will go on to the next stage where you will receive mentorship. And I suppose it's to a limited number of individuals. So you know, it really depends on the quality of the activities or the proposal that you submit. So that is it's something that should be done individually, and then following on from that, then you will be able to get feedback. Samir?
You described everything.
Great. So now I think I'll hand over to Liz for some last few slides. Thank you very much for the interactions.
Great. Thanks so much, Jomel. And I think for all the questions that we've been getting coming in regarding the proposal, we'll be sure to have a Q&A document so we can share all those answers and make sure that those guidelines are clear in the coming days. And a reminder again that we do share out all recordings and presentations. It usually does take a couple days for us to compile those materials, but we will share them with everyone who's registered for the course. So again, if you registered at the beginning with your email address, we will be sending them to you. If you, for some reason, did not register with the right email, just email us at info@boostcommunity.org, and then we can add you to our mailing list. So again, those resources will be available by the end of the week. Just noting on your screen the reflection question, which we posted to the forum in the Boost Learning group. We'd like you to reflect on what from this presentation will help you overcome barriers to writing. Again, we'll post that question, or it's actually already been posted to the forum, and we encourage you to submit your responses there. And then just a reminder that we have 2 sessions left in the series. So the next session will be next Wednesday on advocacy and financing within your own government. And then just a few more reminders. So please do take our post-session survey. Again, you'll need to fill out this survey in order to be counted and receive a certificate of completion at the end of the live engagement series. Again, please be sure to visit the Boost Learning group to engage in the forum and to also to receive those resources that I just mentioned. You can always join our fellowship Telegram channel for timely reminders and announcements. We'll post resources there as well. And then last but not least, of course, just a reminder that the next session is coming up on Wednesday and just a couple more sessions to go. I think with that, I just want to thank all of our facilitators for today's session. I saw a number of comments in the chat, like Jomel referenced. A lot of folks mentioned that the session's been interesting, engaging, and informative. So we do appreciate them sharing their expertise with us. And again, we'll share out all of these resources in the next couple of days. And then, of course, just a thank you to everyone for your participation and engagement throughout the session.